Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're going to be looking at this review copy that I was sent of Silent Titans. Before we begin though, a quick shout out to Mark Buckley, David Compt, and Jack Venning for joining me on Patreon. Patreon is the means that I support this channel, and a huge thank you to all the people who are doing that. All of the supporters at $2 and plus get draft copies of the RPG that I'm developing, Maze Knights. So if you're interested in helping out, you can head down to the link below. All right, on to our review of Silent Titans. So this package came with the book as well as a bunch of add-ons, which we're going to be looking at first, and then we'll dig into the book. These are sold separately from the main book, I believe. If you buy the main book, you receive these in PDF form, is what I understand, but we'll take a look at what they look like in physical form. So it comes with these really cool short little character sheets. Into the Odd characters have a very compact character sheet, so that's really all that you need. Come in a couple different forms. We also have a number of stickers, including these nice shiny gold ones that say Silent Titans on them, and a couple ones featuring characters from the book. Nothing can stop the Titans' rise. I love this one. We also have a bunch of promotional stuff from PAX South, it looks like. And this big package right here. So let's take a look inside. What this has is some supplemental material, including a bunch of miniatures. So it's called the minis. And what these are heavy cardstock paper miniatures that you can cut out or fold up and use in the game if you want characters that match the art style that we see in the book. They're not necessarily of one particular character. They're of a wide variety of character types, so you can use them in a number of different ways. And there's some suggestions right here at the front. There are some interesting characters over here where there's a segment of the game where you're in like this maze tracking people down, and it has characters where you can see what they look like from far away, and on the other side, what they look like close up. So that's kind of a neat thing that you can do there. And lastly, we have a book of the maps. So this is really great because some of the maps in the book are a little small, and so it's great to have them in this huge size. So here are some of the dungeons that you are going to be exploring in Silent Titans, all done in this beautifully MC Escher-esque style. Absolutely fantastic art. This is the sort of thing I would love to just hang on my wall. Moving on, we have the actual book. So Silent Titans is, as I mentioned, an Into the Odd adventure. It uses that system. However, it explores a section of England where I believe Patrick Stuart grew up in, but it has this weird science fantasy take on it. A lot of psychological twists and turns, a lot of reality distortions that you're going to have to navigate. First off, the design of this book is absolutely gorgeous. I love the cover. Here's our back cover. Has this nice shiny gold foil. It's printed by the same people who printed The Dark of Hot Springs Island, so that's the level of quality that we're looking at here. Let me pull off the cover here. I almost like it better without the cover. Has this nice solid black Silent Titans on the inside with this goldenrod cloth cover. Inside the cover, we have this large map, which is very important for a section of the book. So even if you don't have the PDF, this is printed out here because you're actually going to have characters that are going to move around this map for part of it. So it's important to have a physical copy, and they put it inside the book. On the back inside flap, we have an I Search the Body table, which has a lot of weird things that you can just give to players whenever they search the strange denizens of this location. There are some notes on it, so it's not numbered, which I thought was a little odd. And there were some notes like left side, top to bottom, left to right, like these are referring to something, but I'm not really sure what they're referring to. If anyone knows, please leave a comment in the beneath this video. Let's get into the actual book here. So you are exploring this section. So this is a sort of world map. And the general idea here is that there's this peninsula, and there are the silent titans which are sleeping. Their bodies make up sections of the land here, and you're going to be going from section to section, exploring these locations, but most importantly, you're going to be delving down into them, finding a hidden dungeon. There's one in each of these sections, and trying to steal the minds or the thoughts of these silent titans. Their minds are literally gold and diamonds. So it's treasure in a very traditional D&D sense. You're going to start out somewhere on the ocean. You'll be exploring this little fishing village. This main town is sort of like your base of operations. And there is a train that can take you to Bastion, which is the main city from Into the Odd. So there's some connections there. However, traveling outside of this location is very difficult due to all of the reality distortions. So you're kind of trapped here until you can figure out what's going on and how you're going to solve it. We have a general overview. And this book is very Patrick Stuart. So if you've seen my videos before covering some of his books, such as Fire on the Velvet Horizon, which is probably my favorite monster manual of all time, or books like Veins of the Earth, which is a fantastic and very dark version of what it would be like to explore the Underdark if it was more like real caving, much more terrifying. You'll know that I'm a big fan of Patrick Stuart, and especially his very dense, evocative prose. However, what's going on in this book is that he's trying to connect that to a much easier to read style. So just to flip ahead a little bit, you have like a description of an area here, but you can see it's all done in these like bullet points, these nested bullet points where more important stuff is on the left and then more details get nested under that. This does make it much easier to read than a typical Patrick Stuart book, but there's some trade-offs that go with that too. A brief overview of how you're going to start out, how you're going to create your character. One thing that I love about this is that it starts out with a good 60 pre-generated characters, very similar to how Into the Odd works. However, this comes with names and identities and backgrounds and so on. So you can get up and started very, very fast. You just look at the number of hit points your character has and their ability score. I think their highest ability score, or perhaps their lowest. And that gives you a location on this grid, and you have your character good to go. And they're all very strange, weird characters from across time and space. So it might be something like Oddwald Cow King. So you start with a woodsman's axe, a saw, and an animal trap. You're bipolar and a would-be diabolist, a nature hater, and a cow. Yes, you are anthropomorphic animals for a good number of these. Or, for example, you could be Max Goblins. You start with a railgun, polycarbonate sports jacket. You're an idiot from the future who thinks this is all a simulation. So that tells you the kind of tone that we're going to be going for here. Now, one of the best things about this book is this opening essay, which goes on for several pages. It is one of the best essays that I have ever read in any role-playing game for how to actually set up entertaining encounters that players are going to want to interact with. So this book is pretty much worth it just for this essay alone. It has ideas of polarity, how to organize space so that it's easier for players to conceptualize what's going on. The types of prepositions that make that clearer, especially when you're not using a grid. How to design encounters that have held energy so they're more easy to disrupt when players interact with them. How to create workable enemies that players can interact with and affect in meaningful ways. And it gives players little clues and means for altering and taking a grasp on their environment and the people around them. So the world isn't this just mechanism that's happening around them. Players are encouraged to interact with it and mess with things. It's really, really great. It's so concrete and practical, and putting all of this together will create excellent encounters that players will love to deal with. Right away, we jump straight into the first adventure, just called Dementia Bomb. So it all starts in media res. Your characters just find themselves in this crazy situation. Their minds have been wiped. They don't know what's going on, and they're in the middle of fighting someone. So I'll just read you the very first paragraph here. The world blurs into shape. Wreckage like a fractal diamond clockwork is swept into the time tornado, which writhes like a bound snake in the center of the Titan's tower. You cling to the silver stairs. You fools! A voice cries from above. My dementia bomb has wrecked your very minds! Far, far above you, the shape of a fat figure in a top hat, a black and enormous ape, and a golden door. The time storm is loud, but he is louder. You have challenged me for the last time. How will you defeat me now? And so you just find yourselves in this crazy situation. You have to defeat this guy. He's got minions, and you're in this bizarre situation where all of the advice from that previous essay is put into practice. So, for example, you're on these silver stairs winding around a time tornado. So you have verticality. You have a dangerous thing in the middle that you don't want to fall into. You have people up at the top that you're struggling against. There's different directions that you can go. You can go into this clockwork structure where there's all these chains moving up and down with a swinging pendulum. There is a monster down below trying to gobble you up. You have to try and escape from. You can head over into this boat on an ocean with a tower that's swinging back and forth. So there's a lot of motion, a lot of verticality, a lot of great set pieces that you can have great adventures on. Now we'll get to my first criticism of this, which is that these maps are very difficult to read. It's great that it's laid out like this and that I can see the different locations. But to start off with, these different numbers describing the different sections sort of in brief, it's not always clear what they're pointing to. For example, that says the spinal tornado, but it's right next to this tower. So while I was reading this, I thought that this tower was the spinal tornado. Like, I think it's actually this thing over here, but that's not immediately obvious. And some of the words used, like the stylite hulk, it's not totally clear what that is until you realize that stylite means a kind of tower. So there's a lot of vocabulary that Patrick likes his dense and rather arcane vocabulary, but in a lot of cases it makes it harder to understand. Also, because of the MC Escher-esque non-Euclidean nature of some of these scenes, it's really hard to explain what's happening and where things are in relation to each other, which is a big problem that I have. Some of the advice in the essay at the beginning points out that when you're having these types of adventures, what you want to do is constantly reiterate to players where they are, what's around them, what they're near to, and so on. But that's really hard to do when you're in these non-Euclidean spaces. For example, I was really sure while reading this for a long time that this whole thing was one structure, and then you could jump over to this thing over here. But I think that all of this is actually inside the tower, but that's not totally clear. And there's other descriptions of climbing to the top of this and swinging on the bell to the other side. But again, I'm not totally clear on what that looks like or where these things are relative to one another. It's very confusing, and I feel like I would have a difficult time running it as a result. That being said, the different individual pieces of these scenes are often really great and would make for really fun encounters. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Going through the descriptions here, you can see that it does have this sort of tiered style of description. And this does improve the understandability and the ease of use relative to some of Patrick's other adventures, just because you can look at the main bullet points first and get a general sense and then move down. However, a lot of the rationale behind the way that the different sentences are nested is not totally clear. It looks like some of it was maybe partly arbitrary, or it was for stylistic reasons. It's just that, yeah, it was easier to read and put together than some of Patrick's stuff, but it doesn't feel as fully worked out as I've seen in some other adventures that do a similar thing. Another thing I should point out is that at the beginning of this book, it does mention that you can get the rules in the back of the book. However, the rules are not in the back of the book. They have been left out. So the publisher has, to their credit, shipped all of the copies of this with a bookmark that contains all of the rules. Because yes, this is Into the Odd, and the rules can fit on a bookmark. They are very simple. So that's not a huge concern, but it is unfortunate that the rules were left out of the physical book themselves. If you want to know more about Into the Odd, you can check out my review of that book, of that system. I'll put a link right up there for that. So moving on, you escape this encounter and you get thrown into the meat of the adventure. You wash up on this area here. You quickly discover this town, and then from there you start exploring. and you can go back to the town to recover and launch expeditions from there. These Titans that you're going to be exploring, well, here's a brief overview of Legion's Fort, your main base of operations. Patrick Stewart does a great job with a lot of the characters. The characters are extremely distinct. They stick in your head. They have clear motivations. And as mentioned in the early essay, they're workable. There's things that allow you to mess with them. They have weaknesses. They have strengths. They have things that they want. There's ways that you could blackmail them. So there's things for players to grab onto. Here's here's the leader of the town, Hugh Lupus, who I think was a real character. A lot of the locations and characters in this whole book are based on historical characters. Some of them are real people, some of them are just based on real people, and some of them are sort of conglomerations of myths from this part of England, from what I understand, which is really neat. There's a number of factions that you can run into. The Court of Wapentake, and then also the Court of Wassail, who are these two roving bands / courts that have their own rules of how the law works. And running into one or the other can be quite perilous, especially if you run into the Court of Wapentake. That's what I'm going to call it. There's rules for how their court systems work, which are very bizarre, very Alice in Wonderland-esque, which on the one hand sounds entertaining. On the other hand, I feel like I would have a hard time running that, especially the Court of Wassail, which has a lot of these like mini games that you can play with players, but I'm not totally sure how I would do that in practice. I think that's a general criticism of things that I've run into in this book. Ideas that sound really cool, but then you think about it and you're like, how would I actually do that? And you kind of run into a roadblock. I would probably have to change things in order to make things easier to run. We have the Maze of Uriel. That's the maze that I mentioned before. So there's a location that you can get to that has some valuable items and some crazy monsters in it. But it's like this giant glass maze that's floating in 3D. And from everywhere in the maze, you can see all of the other characters that are in the maze. And there's a number of different monsters and factions that may be good or very bad for you. But what's interesting is that you can see them all at once, and they can see you. So it becomes this kind of strategy game where as you move your characters along this maze, the DM moves all of the other characters as well along certain rules, because there's rules for what they want and what they don't want. So there's a puzzle element to this as you navigate this maze. I thought that was really cool. And then we start getting into the different Titans. So how it works is that there's always a 2-page spread, which is really nice, for what it's like on top of that Titan. So R8BY, the font used for a lot of these titles is actually kind of difficult to read, which I'm not crazy about. But so, for example, this Titan would be this section right here. So you explore the surface of it just using these 2 pages. And it's very abstracted. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of that. You roll 2 dice and you're given a concrete location that you're in, or rather 2 of them merged together, and paths leading to 2 different locations, either inside or on this Titan or on a different Titan. And then you sort of play off of that. However, like I said, it's abstracted. You don't have like an actual hex map or anything like that. And I think it's because the dreams of these Titans are causing reality distortions, so navigation is actually very difficult. So I understand how that works from a thematic perspective. I feel it might be a little bit frustrating to play in practice, though. Anyway, so we have short descriptions of some of the locations on top of that Titan, and then a way to delve into the Titan. And these are all laid out similar to the adventure at the beginning, where we have a map, we have a bunch of locations that are done in a sort of short form, and then an expanded version of what's going on there. One thing I would really like is if some of these pictures were maybe a little more detailed. Some of them are just kind of abstract, and it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on there. For the most part, they're pretty good. And but for some of them, especially the more abstract ones, I was sort of staring at the maps being like, wait, what exactly is that? And I would have a hard time matching a particular description to the room. That was a little bit of a problem. It would have been nice if next to these longer descriptions, there was maybe a blown up version of that room, just to make it clearer which room was being referred to. But these rooms, again, bring into play all of the stuff from the essay. where there's a lot of held energy. There's a lot of monsters with special abilities and monsters with plans, and there's just so many things to interact with. Interactivity is clearly a very high priority. We have some stats for the monsters. And each of these titans has their own theme. So this one is the Lord of Swarms, the Maker of Peace, he who makes drones of men. They all follow the same pattern. 2-page spread, what it's like to explore on top of that titan, and then delving into its mind. Each of them is going to require completely different tactics. They're all wildly different from each other in terms of how you would go about exploring them. We have Hilb, the Cleanser of Nature, the Renewer of Life, Titan of Environments, the Arc Queen. This one does have a warning, and it's great that Patrick puts this in here. So it says, this Titan essentially may not be appropriate for everyone. There are themes involving body horror and pregnancy that may not be appropriate for your players. Know your players, ask what they need, and figure out, is this going to be fun or is this going to be a traumatic experience? And do the right thing. We have Brahm, who is the herald of the killer thought, the simulator, the prison without walls, the doorless cage. This one's really crazy, in particular because each of its rooms are basically different hallucinations or different spaces that you find yourself in mentally. It's like its own little scene, and you need to explore the scene and figure out what's going on in order to wake up or die or something else, which will allow you to appear in a different scene. So as you start figuring out what these scenes are, what their rules are, and what you have to do in order to move to a different scene, you can start to manipulate them. One of my favorites, you start over here and you wake up and you're like in a straitjacket in a like mid 20th century psychologist or insane asylum. And a psychologist is just staring at you and all of the other players who are all tied up and saying, so tell me about this character of yours. And they talk to you using your player name rather than your PC. A lot of very weird metagame stuff going on, which can be quite entertaining. Some elements are a little frustrating. For example, there is one room that has the mouse box, which appears to be a little mini game that you can play. And there are rules for the mini game, and there's like a board here. But I read this several times, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out how to play this game. So I feel like there's maybe something missing, or it wasn't fully fleshed out. I don't know. Maybe someone can fill me in on that. But I noticed that in a couple places where there were things that just seemed to be kind of missing. And there are some elements that probably could use more proofreading. There were some typos that I found from here or there. One aspect that I ran into, let's see if I can find it again. I'm not sure where it is now. But I would find sections of the book where the layout had been sort of moved around in a weird way, where like the title of one of these sections was just like at the bottom down here, while the rest of the body text was up here, like it had accidentally been moved up and hadn't been adjusted. So there's things like that from here or there. They're not too common, but it was a little frustrating to see that. We have on Dirk, which is the Lord of Orbits, Master of the Ring, Dreamer of the Void. So this is a dungeon that's actually in space. And again, I ran into a situation where I was looking at this map and I couldn't tell what was really going on. There are rules for how the map is navigated and how it is rearranged, but I had to read this like 5 times to figure out what exactly it was talking about. So that is probably one of my main issues here, is that this could have been edited for clarity in many cases, because parts of it, I just get kind of lost. I'm not totally sure what's going on. Although, like I said, many of the individual elements are really cool and could easily be used in other systems. Or, of course, you could run it as is, but I would probably just create some of my own overarching structure for how this works, because a lot of the descriptions are just hard to parse. It does come with a bookmark, which is nice. And of course, the book quality is great. It has these nice thick paper. Everything lays, well, fairly flat. So it has a great feel at the table. And of course, all of the art is absolutely glorious. It's so weird. It is out there. It does not fit in with the general archetypes of what RPG art looks like. So it stands out. Though, of course, the downside is that it is very abstract on the other side. So a lot of times it would be nice to get a more concrete image of like, what does this character look like? What does this monster look like? What exactly is the layout of this room? And a lot of times this book just won't give that to you. So you're going to have to sort of put some work in there in order to make it work. And we have some descriptions at the end. The Titan Diamond. So this is the mind of the Titan that you're exploring. It gives you more backstory on what exactly is going on inside these Titans' minds and what the consequences are of robbing them of their thoughts, which are gold and diamond. It has some level up rules over here. We have exploring beyond this peninsula that the book takes place in. And we have a really great interview with Chris McDowell by Patrick Stuart. So Chris McDowell is the author of the Into the Odd system. So we get some insight into why the system works the way that it does, which is always great to hear. I love these kinds of design notes. At the very back, we have some more tables for rivers and the sea. So if you explore down the rivers or you're trying to sail away from the peninsula, what could happen? It's not good, just to summarize. Things you don't want to get too far away from the land. The ocean is full of even more crazy distortions that can really mess you up. So that's it for Silent Titans, a really fascinating book put together with a tremendous amount of love and care for the design and for the physical product. A lot of great ideas in here, ripe for stealing. My main criticism is that a lot of it is confusing. Parts of it seem like they weren't fully fleshed out in the sense that I'm not totally sure how to run them. And there were some dungeons where like the general structure of it was a bit mystifying to me. So take that as you will. There's pluses and minuses to it. I'm certainly glad to have it, and I will be using quite a lot of it in my own games, especially the advice at the beginning. If you're curious in checking this book out for yourself, I will put links down in the description below where you can check it out on DriveThruRPG or on the Swordfish Islands shop itself. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you guys next time.